Okay. Hello, everyone. Hope you are well and safe. Welcome to Weekend Chat with Researchers, Session 6 of Season 2. We are Bugbears, a research group at NCBS, which is headed by Dr. Ashwin. And this is a science and research outreach channel. Through these sessions, we aim to bring research closer to science enthusiasts. We believe anybody sitting at home can understand science and research irrespective of one's background. The only thing you require is a mobile device or electronic device with internet connection. And with this, I am Nitish, and with me, Akshara will be hosting this session for next 60 to 70 minutes. Hello, Akshara.
Hi.
So, Akshara, without any delay, why don't you tell our audience what are we going to discuss today and who is the researcher of this chat session?
Have you ever seen a termite mound or a anthill?
Oh, yes, like whenever I go out for a walk, I see big mounds over there.
Yeah.
And
So, have you wondered ever how these things get how are they built?
oh, I always thought that they are not built by anything, like they are just soil piles which are just there.
No, actually, these structures are built by termites and ants, and in fact, these insects reside in them. And in this session, we will learn about what kind of structures these tiny insects make and how do they do it so.
Oh, and today we have Sanjay, who is a professor at NCBS, National Center for Biological Sciences, and his lab at NCBS is majorly interested in studying different aspects of insect flight, including electrophysiological, anatomical, and behavioral studies. And he is also interested in studying insect architecture. And he is actively involved in science outreach sessions to school students and has been organizing a very famous annual moth day at NCBS, but in pre-COVID times, and hopefully it will resume soon. So welcome, Sanjay. You can turn your video
Hello.
on.
Yeah. Hi. How are you?
Hi, Sanjay.
Hello. Welcome, Sanjay. Thanks for coming. Thanks for joining us.
I'm
So,
very happy to be here.
So Sanjay, to kickstart the session, I'll just ask this question that, as Akshara asked me, that ants and the termites form this structure. So, do only insects build this kind of structure, or other kind of animals also form structure?
Oh, animal architecture is very prevalent in all kinds of animals. In fact, uh, I'll give some examples of animals across all uh, kinds of phyla that are able to make these structures. Uh, and the rules in these various phyla are different. So, it's actually a very common phenomenon.
Okay. So, how about we start the session? And I hope you can share the screen.
Yeah. Should I share the video?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Should I begin?
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Nitish and Akshara, for organizing this. So it's a wonderful time to be talking about this as the rains uh, are just starting. And so you will be seeing a lot of termites in the days to come. And I hope that by the end of my presentation and the discussion, you will be able to look at these termites with a renewed sense of awe that we've come to have for them over the years of trying to study how they build large structures. Um, Although I'm going to be talking about termites in the later half of my talk, I want to just mention that uh, the word architecture has typically brings to mind big buildings and human structures. And so if you were to go back and ask, what are the oldest structures? I mean, there are some structures that are somewhat in a state of, I should say, disrepair, that go back to almost 10,000 years. But the oldest sort of uh, intact structure is thought to be Cairn de Bananes, which is about 4850 BC. Okay, so that's not that long ago by most standards, or even by human history standards. And just for comparison, in the last 7,000 years or so, we've come this far. So this is Lower Manhattan, which is one of the tallest skyscrapers in the Western Hemisphere. And this is how exquisite our architecture is as of now. However, you can go back the term and use the term architecture to structures that have been around for millions of years. Okay, and they have evolved. And I want to talk about these structures. And I just, as I mentioned a little while ago, all kinds of animals built them. So I have just given two examples here. One is of a beaver dam. So the beavers are rodents that build these extraordinary structures. They actually can change the way rivers move. They have had extraordinary impact on the environment, and these are single rodents that fell big trees, and then they have very sharp teeth. They fell big trees, and then what they do is they bring a lot of twigs, etc., and they build these dams, and they can sort of stop the rivers or change the flow of the rivers. And they do this for a very selfish purpose, which is to make sure that their nests are, they have these nests in the middle of the water, so as to escape predation. Um, so this this is what they do. Uh, on the right here are prairie dogs nest architectures. You must have seen movies of prairie dogs. They rear their head up from holes in the ground. But under the ground, there are these extraordinarily complex mazes that they build, and they have really a wonderful architecture of these mazes. That you know this is of course a colonial animal, so it a large number of them occupy uh, these uh, these nests, or these homes, if you will,
Mhm.
burrows. Um, if you look at birds, of course, I'm sure you've seen the Baya weaver bird. You see them all around southern India, peninsular India. And if you were to look at these structures that they build, they are just marvelous. I have to mention that they are as marvelous for the architecture. Remember that these are built out of straw or grass, dried grass, and woven in place, and they are able to hold the eggs of these of a pair. And what's amazing about these is that they can withstand some of the worst storms that would normally fell most human-made structures. These birds are extraordinary. So if you were to tour around a storm-hit area, you're more likely to see Baya weaver birds' nests intact. Uh, so this is in the old world, and in the new world there is a structure. It's not related to bias. uh, it's a bird called Oropendula. I think it's a closer relative of orioles, which builds a very similar structure. I mean, the reason I put these two side by side is to say that although they look similar, although they seem to have come out of have a similar design, these are actually completely independent. They have evolved completely independently, and they are unrelated birds, and yet they are able to build these really wonderful nests. The nests are perfect for the kind of things that the birds need them for, which is to store eggs, but also to insulate, keep them away from the elements, so to speak. And remember that one of the major uh, predators of these eggs are snakes. And so one of the key functions that these nests serve is to protect the eggs from snakes. Snakes find it very hard to go and access these nests. So it's just a marvel of evolution.
So Sanjay, I have one question.
Yeah.
Like before the session started, like I was wondering that we humans, though we had like natural instinct to build homes just to maybe prevent ourselves from natural disaster or like a predator. So, we kind of studied this kind of architecture. We kind of passed on information from within ourselves. So how do these birds know that these kind of materials should I use for making a structure and this should be the shape? Or do we know about that or
Oh,
even?
this is a really wonderful question and goes at the heart of what is so fascinating about behavior. So in behavioral biology, there is this term that is often used. It's called innate behaviors. Okay, uh, and there was a very interesting biologist who actually contributed a great deal. He was a polymath, not just a biologist. He was a politician, poet, all sorts of things from South Africa. His name was Eugene Marais. And many years ago, he addressed exactly that question. He asked, "Are these birds learning from one another, or are these instinctive behaviors, meaning that they're born with these instincts?" And he conducted an experiment that appears in his book called Soul of the White Ant. It's a book mostly about termites, which are also called white ants, which is a misnomer because termites are not actually related to ants. They are more closely related to cockroaches, as you'll see in a bit. And he asked, are these able to? So I forget the bird that he worked with, but what he showed was that he could rear a bird, hand rear it, keep it away from all kinds of the two things that this particular bird does. First is it is able to know what to do with a blade of grass, it is able to weave. And second is that if it sees worm, so normally it's a frugivore, it eats fruits, but if it sees but the chicks get to feed on worms. Okay. And what Eugene Marais showed was when he hand reared these birds and fed them um, himself, and he did this for 4 generations, making sure that they were kept away from all kinds of grasses, or they never got to handle grass. And then in the 5th generation, he gave them grass, okay, and they were able to build a nest.
Oh,
So, the implication from there is that these behaviors are innate. They just know. They don't learn from one another, but they just know. Uh, does that? I don't know if that answers your question. Now,
it
Okay.
answers.
I
So,
want to also, yeah, I
yeah,
want to
so
also sort
on
of,
same lines, we have a question from Harini. So she asked, how do very small insects like ants and make big ant hills? How much
hmm,
time does it take for them to make it?
okay. So time is a scalable issue in the insect world. They can build very large structures in a very short time. For instance, termites can build large structures overnight if the need arises. If there is a danger, or if there is uh, if they perceive a threat, they can very quickly build very large. They are incredible. But remember that there are millions of them, and so it's just a function of how many recruits there are. You'll see answers to some of these questions as we enter the termite part of the talk.
So I just want to make an announcement to our viewers over there. So don't hesitate asking any question related to the session. We will pitch up your questions to Sanjay and he will answer it. So all Sanjay is all yours today.
Okay, very much so. Um, uh, I want to say that architecture is not just the purview of terrestrial animals. It is also the purview of even the what we call the lowest forms. They're not the lowest form. They are as evolved as us in every sense of the term. But on the top here is a structure that I particularly like. It's called the lugworm. Um, it's a kind of a polycate worm, and what it does is, it's typically eaten by birds, so it tries to hide from birds. And so what it does is it burrows into the soil, and it is a filter feeder. So now it has a problem, which is that if it burrows into the soil, there is no water. It's not going to be able to filter feed. It needs constant flow of water over its body to filter feed. And so what it does is something very interesting. As you'll see on the right here, there's a hole right there, uh, and on the right of that hole is something that looks like a bump. You can see this on the side here, and that bump is because of some fecal matter that it has put there. And what this does is it creates two different levels. So you have a bump here and a dip here, and as a result of this, there is a pressure differential when the water flows over, and that pressure differential causes water to go through this tunnel. Okay, and this means that there's flow over the polychaete's body, or the lugworm's body, and it is able to filter feed. Okay, this is again an example of architecture. And of course, we all know about coral reefs, which are made by Cnidarian taxa, which are Cnidarian, so they're sort of relatives of jellyfishes. And they, of course, are extraordinary because, as you all know, they house some very, very complex ecosystems within them. A large number of fish and different kinds of invertebrates reside in these coral reefs, which is why it's very important to preserve them. Um, but today I'm going to talk about insect architecture. And one of the things that fascinates me about insect architecture and uh, makes this a particularly interesting topic is that it is so ubiquitous. It is everywhere. You can find insect architecture in your backyard. If you walk into my balcony, to the side, I will show you in a little bit, is the mud. If you look up on the trees, you will find, you know, rock bee nests. For instance, the one here. Then there are these paper wasps that build these interesting nests on the ground, especially in monsoon. You see these little tubes that come up. These are made by ants. Uh, weaver ants are everywhere, certainly in our campus, and in the southern peninsula in large. What they do is they use secretions by the larvae to weave together these leaves and form enclosures inside which the colony can reside. Uh, then there are carpenter bees. You'll find these really large sized bees, perhaps the largest size found around here. You can actually hear them fly. They're like a little helicopter. Um, and what they do is they make perfectly circular holes, as you've seen here, inside dead wood, and they make these chambered structures where they can keep their larvae. Okay, uh, and then of course they feed the larvae with time. And then this extraordinary nest is that of a harvester ant. Again, something that is an absolute marvel. You take a look at it and you know that the the creature that built this must have a very complex brain. Yeah. So all of these are structures that you can see very easily in your backyard. And I'm sure if you were to decide to go and sort of take your cell phone and take pictures of this, please, by all means, feel free to email me these pictures. uh, because the crazier these structures, the more interesting we find them. And so it's a really nice kind of a hobby to have. is to keep looking for architecture or architecture, nice picture. I'm going to show you something really amazing. This is excerpt from a David Attenborough documentary, and I want you to take a look. Okay, there's a very nice commentary that goes with it, so I hope you can hear it. Just let me know, Nitesh, if you can't hear it. Okay.
The plants, because by far are insects. All around me in this Borneo rainforest, there are millions of tiny mouths munching away invisibly. To give you some idea of the length to which an insect will go in order to get a vegetarian meal in safety, look at this. Clearly, it's a badly damaged leaf, but where is the creature that's doing the damage? This is it.
Can you
a
hear the
tiny
commentary?
caterpillar. It's
Yeah.
soft, it's defenseless, it's clearly an excellent mouthful for many a bird. So if it is to survive, it has to take steps to protect itself. It starts by making a semicircular cut into the leaf from the margin. But when the cut is only half complete, it starts from the other end. It spins silk across the hinge. That, as it dries, contracts and helps the caterpillar pull over the segment to form a roof. To make its tent a little more commodious, it cuts a pleat, pulls it across, and now it's got a little wigwam. The whole process only takes a few hours and is usually done at night when there are no birds around. Now the caterpillar can feed in safety, shaving off the soft surface layers of the leaf out of the sight of any hungry bird, and at significant cost to the plant.
So as you can see, this is an example of a caterpillar that is building these extraordinary nests, not nests, protective homes, so they can feed in peace. So they do not want to be noticed by birds, and so they are able to do this by literally camouflaging themselves using these leaves. So, and that's the sort of thing that really I find interesting and astonishing. This video was brought to my notice by my students very recently, and I just thought this was one of the funnest things I'd seen in a long time. Here's the one that I was just mentioning. This is literally last week that I took a picture of this wasp. This is I think a blue mud dauber wasp, and as you can see, it has built a multi-chambered. Actually, there's more than one. So this is kind of a apartment complex, if you will. And what this wasp does, I'll just play this video because you can see its antennae move. And what you can see it doing is it's just sort of standing there, and it keeps going back and forth. What they do is they build these multi-chambered apartments, and they store their larvae inside of it. And every day they bring a caterpillar for the larvae to eat. Okay, so this is a mother that is taking good care of her children.
So I have a question. So is this made by multiple or like
Yeah,
wasp? Or, okay.
yeah,
So
yeah.
okay.
Yeah, and you will find these all over Bangalore. In fact, you have been in a really fun set of conversations with a relative who found similar nests under his chair while he was working at home, and he has been obsessed with it and been taking pictures of it. and we've just had the most interesting conversations. Uh, Of course, all of us are familiar with this. This is a spider web. And again, as you know, that the spider web is very intricate. It's made of material, which is really, really tough. Can you imagine a web like this can take the impact of a bee that bumps into it at full speed and is able to still hold and capture the bee, in fact. So it doesn't rip the web apart. It is thought to be as strong as steel. Um, in its strength is simply, it's probably even stronger than steel. Um, and it's interesting in other ways. So there are parts of the web which are sticky and other parts which are not sticky. And the spider knows exactly where it needs to be so that it doesn't itself get stuck. And so it's really kind of a marvel of nature. Some years ago, some researchers did something interesting, and the only reason I bring this up is to tell you that there is a complex brain that is behind these structures. And so what you can do is you can play little experiments with the brain. And in this case, the researchers chose to feed the spider with narcotics. Okay. And what you see is what happens to the different kinds of brains when it's different kinds of webs when the spider is given narcotics. Okay. So on the top left is a normal one. That's what a web normally looks like. But if you now start to give the spider different kinds of chemicals, marijuana, benzedrine, caffeine, chloral hydrate, you can see that it still builds the web, but it is now building the web in funky designs. So there's a brain that is functioning when normally functioning, builds the web in a certain way. If you mess around with the brain, then the design of the web changes. Okay, and so uh, all I want to say is that when you see this, and when you see all the examples that I've shown you, there are there are questions that spring to your mind. The first question that should spring to our mind is, how is this brain organized? How does this brain actually, uh, you know, accomplish the task of building this? Remember that it's using tools. Okay, it's using in many cases tools that generates itself. In the case of spider, it has a spinneret that builds, it that uh, generates the web, which it then pulls and makes a web out of. But in the case of the caterpillar, it was using an external material, the leaf, right? So in the case of carpenter bees and some many of the other examples. And so the animal or the insect has to play with the material that is available to it. And it has to use a particular set of steps, go through a particular set of steps to be able to build the structure. And remember that this has to be done in a way that accomplishes the task. Otherwise, this animal will not survive. Okay, and will eventually be selected out of the evolutionary process. So, uh, of course, these structures have evolved just as the animals have evolved over millions of years. And the question that we get really intrigued by is, how is this animal accomplishing these series of tasks? Okay, we are interested in what sensory cues are used by the animals, what initiates the building of a nest, for instance, and how are the sensory cues then translated into actions that then accomplish this task. Okay, so this is just questions. One can sit down and write a large number of questions. You can ask, for instance, how have these nests evolved um, over time? I mean, was the rudimentary nests as perfect as this one, or was it only half as good? And in fact, when you study a large number of animals, when you study the diversity of animals, a lot of these answers are there to be discovered, and we are interested in what these questions are and what these answers are, and how animals achieve these extraordinary things. And of course, we are very interested in the nervous system and the brain and what's going on inside the brain. Um, I talked about the diversity of structures. So this is just to uh, tell you that across insect taxa, pretty much across most insect taxa, you see some sort of structure building. Okay, and we have just these are some lovely sketches by Shubha, my student Shubha Ramaswamy. And you can see here all kinds of insects from different orders: earwigs, dung beetles, crickets, caddisflies, antlion. This antlion actually is really interesting right here in E. This is a predatory larva that actually sits at the bottom of a pile of a cone that it has built, and there is loose mud on the side of the cone. It just places loose mud there. Okay, uh, and when something falls in this, then and tries to climb up, it can't because of the loose mud, and then the antlion larva will go and eat it because it senses that there is a struggling insect. Then there are the tent caterpillars, leaf rollers. You just saw one example of something like a roller. Uh, Bagworms, all kinds of insects. And of course, wasps and bees, ants on your right are all closely related insects. These are insects that all belong to the uh, to Hymenoptera. Um, they're they're closely related to each other. Um, but termites aren't part of this group. Even though termites have been called white ants, they are actually closely related, as I said, to cockroaches. And if you just run your eyes over these structures, you will see that they are simply extraordinary in the diversity, in the kinds of materials they use, the processes involved in curing these materials. Not all of these materials are ready for hive building. So, to give you one example, bees use wax to build their hives, and this wax is secreted by the bee. And it's what's very important is that the wax has a certain, if you heat it up a little bit, it flows more easily, and so bees actually manage to um, play with that material or to manipulate the material by changing its temperature. Okay, so these are all ways in which it is able to
Uh,
uh,
I have a question. So, how do they manage to change the temperature? Like, how do the bees manage to change
so
the
bees can generate
temperature?
their own heat by vibrating their muscles,
Mm,
and so this is one way in which they can and then they can also cool their hives by flapping their wings.
mm,
Okay, so it's yeah.
interesting.
um, Yeah, I mean, they do this in some other contexts as well. For instance, if there's an infection in the hive, bees will collectively raise the temperature of the hive. It is like a fever, uh, and so they are able to really do this in many interesting ways.
So Sanjay,
Yeah.
like you have given these examples. So I have this question: like, if a particular wasp, which is like maybe is in Bangalore, for example,
Hmm.
and that particular species of wasp, if it is in maybe Delhi or some other country, uh, do they build similar kind of structure, or do they kind of modify according to the availability of things?
I mean, this is a really, again, a very interesting question, and something that we are interested in the context of termites, because the soil that they use, say in Bangalore, is very different from the soil that they'll use, closer to the west coast of India, or in the heart of, Madhya Pradesh. Uh, the soil's material is different. It can have more sand in it as opposed to more clay, and the structure of the hive will actually be different. Uh, you know, and of course, the big question is the way that they build this hive different? We don't know the answer to that. Actually, these are exactly the kinds of questions that are, beginning to get interesting for us. And a key part of this uh, is soil mechanics.
Right.
And I never thought I would ever get interested in soil mechanics, but uh, you know, sometimes you just have to because the problem demands it.
So have you tried or have anyone tried maybe migrating or shifting a particular set of termites, for example, or Bangalore to some other kind of soils and check if even if they are able to make it or not?
Not exactly that, so far as I'm aware, but they have tried giving termites different materials. In fact, this is something that even in ISC, Rene Borges' lab has done experiments of these sorts, and they are really fascinating experiments where they are using different kinds of materials to build uh, structures, and they seem to use them just fine. Yeah, like glass
So,
beads and so on. Yeah.
yeah. So there's a question from Harini. So you talked about giving spiders different chemicals and like they all messed up the web. So she asked in relation to that. So do these chemicals work only on spider or there are examples of other animals? Uh, like
They
they,
would probably work on every other insect. Yeah. Yeah, that's an excellent question. Yeah.
And the continuation to that question is like in what way these chemical work on spider, like as you mentioned that they target brain,
Yeah.
so
Yeah, I
specific.
mean they work, in just in similar ways as they would work with us. I mean, neurons have many conserved properties. I mean, neurons of insects are quite different from neurons of vertebrates, but in many ways they are similar. They have similar channels, and so in as much as chemicals will affect the properties of these neurons, the same kinds of chemicals will have different similar effects, right? So I'm just speaking very generally, but uh, you know the at the core of the physiology, it's how the chemical interacts with the physiology of the neuron, and that is similar.
Sanjay, so these different structures. So what is the purpose? So mostly I can think of like for example like for praying or for taking care of the offsprings. So can you just tell me other purposes of these different architectures?
Yeah, this is a good question. So protection is one very important function that enclosures serve. Protection from the elements, protection from predators, uh, protection in general, right? From weather, etc. Uh, the other a very important purpose that they serve is storage of food. So a large number of these nests are actually storing food. Um, then, um, yeah, I mean, these are the two main ones, really. But if you think about it, there is so much that is important about. Let's consider beehives, for instance, or termite mounds. Okay, uh, when you house a large colony, be it in a city. In fact, it's a interesting time to be talking about this. There's a threat of infections. Okay, and infections can spread, you know, in direct proportion to density. So the hives have all of the same kind of threats as do crowded cities, and so they have to make provisions for this. So it's not surprising, for instance, that the honey has medicinal properties. It has properties, antifungal properties, or the hive material has antifungal properties. And so many medicinal properties come from there, and that's because these are problems that the insect is trying to solve. Uh, it doesn't want its hive to be affected by fungus. It doesn't want its hive to be affected by bacterial infections, and so just naturally these hives have those kinds of properties. And so, yeah, I mean, it's these are the various functions: to house the brood, to, yeah, store food, etc. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. So what I'm going to do, I mean, I just mentioned that these are diverse hives, and I told you that there's a brain behind them, and we would like to know what the rules are for building these structures. Okay, what are the rules, and we want to be able to state these rules in form that are testable, so as models or hypotheses that are testable. Okay, and so we set out to do this. This is with my students Shubha and Shri Krishna, and we tried to sort of collect all the examples of different kinds of uh, you know uh, algorithms, if you will, of building, and we've put them together in a review that we wrote recently. So I'm just going to take you through some of these different kinds of algorithms. Okay, so, and what I'll do is at the beginning of each model, I will first show you an example of that structure and then describe what's going on. Okay, so let's take this example. This is a caterpillar that is uh, pulling out a thread that it secretes, and it is building a cocoon. Okay, it's building a protective tent, if you will, of uh, this. Now the question is, uh, what is it doing? Is it paying attention to what it just did? Is it getting any feedback, etc.? Right. So what we this seems to be an example. Okay, and these are just hypotheses, so we need to be testing them, but this seems to be an example of what we call fixed action pattern building, meaning that the caterpillar starts right here at S0. Okay, and it it performs an action, and the action has a certain output. Okay, but that output doesn't actually affect the next action. Okay, it will just perform these actions in a series, and finally, and at each point you will see these different states of the structure. So this is a caterpillar that is building these kind of uh, uh, protective canopy with leaves, but it's not paying attention to necessarily what it has just achieved, just goes in a flow, and finally you get a building. Okay, so that's one kind of hypothesis. So it is programmed, if you will. It's like a wind up toy, right? So if you wind up the toy, it will perform a series of actions, and we call those as roughly as fixed action pattern building. So the idea is that once elicited, the construction behavior continues along a fixed pattern with no reference to the feedback. Okay. Uh, if you were, therefore, if you want to test this, right, if you were to step in and pull out some part of it, okay, then it should not repair it because it has already moved on. Okay. So certain kinds of structures are of this nature, where they don't necessarily uh, pay attention to any kind of feedback. Yeah.
So, but when you say that they have reached to a final form, so how does the caterpillar recognize it that this particular state is the final state and I have to stop building?
That could vary a lot. I mean, it depends. So, that's there. It is probably paying attention to some sensory cue. Let's say light, for instance. Now, if there's no light, it means that its job is done. It has built a structure. But what I'm talking about is in the process of building, meaning that it's pulling out a thread, sticking it somewhere, and it just performs repetitive actions. Okay, and it keeps doing this till some other cue like light is obscured. Okay, let's take another example. This is a really interesting video, one of my favorites. This is of a potter wasp, again something you'll see in your backyard. Okay, let me play this video. This is similar to the mud dauber wasp that I just showed you. But watch how intricately it is building this pot. It keeps going, getting circular balls of clay. And, it's notice that it is moving its antennae uh, constantly. And if you were to, I'll come to this in a bit. Just watch this video. So it keeps doing this. And of course, what it's doing is building a pot so that it can house a caterpillar, and it will inject its eggs into the caterpillar, and the eggs will then eat up the caterpillar of some other, like a moth or a butterfly or something like that. This is my favorite part, where it makes the mouth of the pot.
This is so fascinating.
Okay. And then it lays its eggs, and after this it will go get a caterpillar so that the eggs can eat that caterpillar, and that caterpillar will be stunned by an injection of venom, uh, so it remains paralyzed. So in this case, the model that we are suggesting is, or which has been suggested in the field, is that of a Markovian building. Okay, which means that uh, you have a series of actions, but those actions are actually consequences of previous actions. Okay, so here's another example of a wasp that builds this tube like structure out on the mouth. So the nest is below, and then it builds this tube like structure on the outside. And if you were to go in and manipulate this, okay, then it will actually begin building the tube all over again. So for instance, if I were to go and sort of cut this tube here, and then the wasp knows that it's been cut, and it will build another tube right on top of this. Okay, and what this means is that it is paying attention to the outcome of what it just did. Okay, so what that suggests is that in this scenario, once elicited, the construction behavior continues along a fixed pattern, but with reference to feedback. If you manipulate the structure midway, uh, then the final form will be different. So for instance, I've actually tried this experiment with the potter wasp, where when it goes out to get a new ball of clay, you can block the entrance. And then what it will do is when it comes back, it looks at the entrance, and then it will actually make a hole in another side of the pot. Okay, so it alters the shape of the pot. Uh, so it is paying attention to uh, the feedback. It's getting feedback about the structure. This is another thing that you will see in and around Bangalore a lot. These are these ants that.
I have
Uh,
one small question about
yeah.
previous example, not regarding structure, but
Yeah.
as you mentioned that wasp brings other caterpillar for feeding its larva. So
Yeah.
uh, like because it's like in nature these insects feed on each other and they have different structure. So do we know that a particular species of insect has learned the structure of like or a housing structure of other insect just to feed on them or just to evade maybe predatory nature? For example, a bee or a fly invading spider's web, for example.
I mean, there are examples of that. When you say learned, we have to be careful about what we mean. Learning could happen within an individual,
Huh.
or learning can happen over evolutionary timescales.
I would say like I meant to ask on over evolutionary time scale.
Yes, so there are many examples of those kinds of things. Uh, the examples of a predator that has learned to find its way into the nest
Mhm.
of another animal, and examples of how other animals. So, one very interesting example is of a particular kind of, I think it's a fly that, no, sorry, it's a kind of a moth that is able to disguise its odor uh, to resemble that of a ant pupa,
Oh, mhm.
okay, of an ant larva, sorry. And then what it does is that, the ant then sort of carries these larvae into their nests,
Oh,
and where it is now protected and it's even sort of fed by the ants. But then there is this predator called the ichneumon wasp.
mhm.
Okay, the ichneumon wasp will then enter the nest,
Oh,
and it will spray a pheromone that causes the ants to fight with each other.
oh,
So and then while the ants are fighting with each other, the ichneumon wasp goes in and injects its eggs uh, into these moth larvae. So there's all kinds of absolutely fascinating examples out there, and they are just baffling. Every time one comes across these, you begin to realize just how complex these processes are, and also that if you give a system millions of years, it can evolve some extraordinarily fascinating things
and it's interesting that these things are happening just around us. Like,
all around us. Yes, they are everywhere if we choose to keep them.
So
um,
there is
yeah.
a question from Mohammed Ami.
Mhm.
What about honeybee combs construction? Is it a feedback regulated? And which of these systems are basically more common in nature?
I can't say which are more common. I mean, that requires us to kind of count and keep track of all the structures, which is an overwhelming task. Honeybees hive structures are certainly feedback driven. They are very much feedback driven and pretty complex. Um, so let's take a look at the should I move on?
Yeah.
So watch these ants carefully. What you will see is that each ant is doing its own thing here. Okay, it goes up with a ball of mud and then drops the ball of mud and comes back down. Okay, then it takes a ball of mud again, drops it, and comes back down. Okay, if you focus on any one ant here, it's doing more or less the same thing. Okay, now this seems like a case where you have something like a fixed action pattern, but a large collective of individuals are each doing their own thing. And so the model would be depicted sort of like this. So here is what one individual does. It is doing something similar to what we saw in the last example, but you add up many such things, and what you get is the final structure. Okay, and that's what you just saw here. And so in this case, the hypothesis is that the individuals follow fixed action pattern building, but do not interact with each other or with the structure. Okay. Uh, So in this case, the removal of individuals will not alter the behavior of their nest mates. So if you remove a bunch of ants from here, the other ants will continue to do what they've been doing. Okay, it won't change anything. Uh, so this is a process we call collectively built emergent structures. They just emerge from the collective activity of many different individuals. Uh, Here is an example of weaver ants. These are again a collective, but watch what these guys are doing. Now here, these animals are actually cooperatively building. Okay, they are cooperating in that some ants are busy holding the leaf together, while other ants are busy stitching them together. And so, every ant is doing something different. Okay, they are not all doing the same thing. And so this is a very different example than the one that I just showed you. And together, what they do. So in this case, as I mentioned, they have these larvae which they use, and the larvae secrete a thread, and they use these threads, as you can see right there, uh, to stitch together the leaves. Again, these are things you'll see in your backyard all the time. This is very common. And so these are cooperatively built emergent structures. So in this case, again, you have many individuals, but they are interacting as shown by this double-headed arrow right there. Okay. In the previous case, that double-headed arrow wasn't there. And you know what the what all the ants do, uh, uh, all ants are paying attention to feedback, uh, and that feedback is important. So if you were to go in and make a manipulation here, the ants would react to it and try to make amends. Okay, so in this case, what you see is individuals follow fixed action pattern building, but they interact with each other. Okay, so they are communicating, and so it is in this case that you start asking questions about what is the nature of that communication. And uh, if you remove specific individuals, this will alter the behavior of the nestmates. For
So,
instance, if you removed some of the ants from that bridge that they had built, when they were forming these bridges, if you remove some of them, then ants from the surroundings will come and start now you know helping out with the bridge. Okay, so that's a change in their behavior based on what you did.
So,
Sorry, Akshara.
yeah. So, like bees, they have different categories. They have queen. They have a worker bee. So, is it a similar kind of categorization in these ants to a
Yes,
different
these
category
ants
of?
have castes. These
Yeah.
ants have castes. A lot of social insects have what we call castes, which means there's a division of labor. uh, Different parts of the colony do different things.
And how do they interact with each other? For example, bees do by dancing or some different patterns of.
Different insects do it differently. It's a fascinating question again, because it goes to the heart of asking what are the modes of communication. uh, some of these are mechanical cues. They
Mhm.
bump into each other, or they bite each other, or they poke each other, or something like that. Many of these actually are chemical cues. uh, and again, it's a really important question as to what is the language of these, uh, of this communication. And finally, we come to termites, which is what we are working with. So here's a video that we've taken of termites. All the other videos were sort of sourced from the web, um, but this one's taken, I think, by Shubha or Shri Krishna. And what you can see here is that they roll little balls of mud, which they push. These are moist balls of mud that they push against existing structures, and they then fuse to form these extraordinary, uh, you know, mounds that we see. And so in this case, what you're seeing is something very interesting, which is that the uh, the in this case the termites aren't so far as we know, not directly communicating with each other. They're communicating with each other indirectly through the structure. Okay, so what they do is they lay down the cues on the structure, and then the structure communicates with the nestmate. So this is a hypothesis called the stigmergic hypothesis, in which the coordinated building occurs via insect structure interactions. Okay, so imagine a scenario where, suppose, in the NCBS building, there was some sort of a disrepair. Okay, let's say the light bulb stopped working. Somebody noticed this, and then put a note on the light bulb saying repair here. Okay, then somebody was walking past, saw a note saying repair here, and went and uh, you know uh, uh, wrote another note in another part, or something like that. And this is how the communication is happening, right? It's through the structure. Nobody's directly talking to each other. And that's sort of what we think is going on here. So in this case, if individuals follow fixed action pattern building, but interact with structure, then changing the structure will cause changing the behaviors. If you change the structure, then it should cause changes in their behavior. And so this is exactly the experiment that I'm just going to show you now. But before I show you this, let me give you a little bit of a natural history lesson about termites. So these mounds, as you are aware, are very tall. This is Amritansh Vats, a past student of mine, who's standing there. He's about 6 foot tall, and the mound is slightly taller than him. This mound is sealed quite nicely from the elements. It houses a large scale colonies of termites, millions of termites. It varies in shapes and sizes, as you'll see in a little bit. There's as much of it underground as above the ground. And the colony contains a queen, soldiers, major and minor workers, and this this one caste called alates. These are the termites that have wings, and they are the ones that will fly out. They are housed in chambers which are opened when the humidity rises, and after the rains, for instance, and then these fly and mate and form new colonies. Okay, so they are sort of like the gonads of the um, not the gonads, but the sex organs um, um, of the termites. What's also interesting is that inside this mound, the termites farm a fungus, and it's a specific kind of fungus, which is it's like agriculture, fungiculture, if you will, which is used by the termites to break down food so that it can, because it can't itself break down cellulose. So the fungus helps break it down. And inside the mound, there's a complex maze of tunnels and bridges. Uh, so let me give you a glimpse of what this is like. This is a video taken on NCBS campus, so you can actually recognize maybe some of the structures here. So here's the building. This is just as you enter the Eastern Lab complex. And if you now look inside, you'll see this. This is an underground uh, um, mound, not mound, but underground sort of nest. And you can see large numbers of termites busily uh, um, working away. And there's a lot of activity that's going on, right? So now you'll find a mound like this. Now, what the mound does, as I mentioned, is it sends out alates whenever there rains. And these alates are males and females that will fly. They will mate with each other, and then they will fall to the ground. And then the female will start to grow. Okay, and to give you a size, the termites themselves are just a few millimeters long, but the queen in her final size is about the size of my thumb. Okay, uh, and she is only an egg laying machine. She can't walk. You can see that there's a little body here, but everything else is just the egg manufacturing factory. Okay, and she's tended to by the other colony uh, individuals, and she will give rise to eggs which form soldiers and workers, major and minor workers. These are different in size, and these together build the mound. Okay, that you see. Right. So this is sort of the now this is closely related to cockroaches. So this is the large mound, and there is a the termites are very small. So I'll just going to blow this up. This beautiful picture is of a termite in the mound. What I want you to see is that this worker termite has no eyes. Okay, it's doesn't have image forming eyes. You know that normally insects have compound eyes, but this termite is blind. Okay, the only termites which have eyes are the alate termites, the ones that fly. Okay, uh, and so um, these structures are being built by insects that are effectively blind, and that makes it even more interesting. And here's a scanning electron microscope image of the head, and as you can see, there are no eyes. Okay, just antennae, mandibles, and so on. I mentioned that these mounds come in all shapes and sizes, and in answer to a question, I also mentioned that they're built out of different materials. So you can see that the falcon tube gives you a sense of scale in this. And if you cut the mound and look inside, then you'll see that it's really complex. Uh, these are structures of extraordinary complexity. We don't fully understand them, uh, but they have chambers, they have places for the fungus, they have places where they house the queen and brood and so on.
So Sanjay, I have this question of like you said that termites farm fungi.
Yeah.
So like do they like actually plan to do it, and do they put some substance to feed fungi also?
Yeah, so the fungi, I don't know if they plan to do it. I mean, we can't really answer those kinds of questions because we don't know what's going on in their mind. But they do carry a culture of the fungus with them. Uh, and that's how they seed the fungus. They do feed the fungus with cellulose, with dead wood material, which then the fungus breaks down. Uh,
And so do
Uh,
they have a
uh,
specified space, like an allotted space for like farming, for example?
there are chambers within which there are the fungus grows. Yeah.
so earlier you said they carry the fungus as in like so like sorry, how do they maintain that fungus culture that they have, like is this some kind of like in the mound they have a specific space, or how do
I
they
don't
carry?
know. It is a lot of these questions we don't have clear answers to. What one assumes is that when the alates take to wing, they carry with them some some fungus, which then once the mound is built, they will you know that fungus will then grow.
So we have a question on YouTube by Anil Kulkarni.
Mhm.
He asked that does termite of different places or species have similar nest building behavior?
Sorry, I didn't hear you properly, Nitesh.
So Anil asked that does termite of different places or species have similar nest building behavior or similar interaction between them?
Oh no, there is huge diversity of termite, uh, structures. Huge diversity. You'll find there are termites that build arboreal nests on in trees, for instance. There are termites that build on the bark of trees. You'll find that quite a lot. There are termites which build nests indoors. You'll find these tunnels. So, for instance, I'll just show you a picture of these. So, there is kind of tunnels that they build, foraging tunnels. Uh, you know, uh, this is what destroys so many wooden houses in rural India. eats up pictures. These are those termites that, make these tunnels. Uh, so, they are many different kinds, and different termites have different kinds of interactions, one would imagine. Yeah.
Also, we as humans like tend to move from one house to another house, or we kind of maybe uh,
Yeah.
change houses, right?
Yeah.
So do termite also do the, show this kind of behavior, or they just stay in one house permanently?
Uh, I can't answer that question for termites, but ants will regularly change nest sites. And in fact, if you're interested, you should really look at the wonderful research coming out of Sumana Annagiri's lab in ISER, Kolkata. Her lab actually studies this very question of how nests are relocated, uh, ant nests in her case. So, yeah, I mean, different insects will do that. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. So termites are like they're builders, and they build with little blocks of mud. Uh, these muds they ingest, they coat it with something, and then they uh, bring it out. And as you can see in this case, they keep depositing these structures, and they push it. As you can see, if you just watch this termite here. Uh, and it eventually seals up, and you get these really robust structures. Okay, so the size of the brick is determined by the size of the mandible. There's a video that Shubha took, and they build these structures. Okay. um, Now building involves two things. One is excavation, meaning you pull out mud, and the other is deposition, which means you deposit mud. And so, how does a termite know where to pull mud out of and where to deposit it? This is one question that we are interested in. I won't talk too much about it today. This is the work that Shubha is doing. And, you know, um, we're finding that there are chemical cues involved in these different kinds of behaviors. Okay, so um, we have two hypotheses. One is that the code is hierarchical. I just mentioned the hypothesis, but I won't actually talk about the experiments that we're doing. So the code is hierarchical, which means it's sort of like a postal address, in which, so in a postal address, you specify the location based on hierarchical cues. You say that this country, then this city, or this state, and then this city, and then this town, or this locality, and then this house in the locality. So these are hierarchical cues that precisely specify what the location is. Similarly, our hypothesis is that there are hierarchy of cues which specify, okay, this is this kind of a termite nest, and this is this particular action required for the termite nest, either excavate or deposit. So these cues are layered on top of each other. Okay. And then this, there will be a nest specific queue. For instance, this colony has this specific queue, and then the other colony has other specific queue, stuff like that. So those hypotheses we are testing. The other hypothesis, the alternative hypothesis, is that the code is specific. It's sort of like a unique password, right? Uh, which is shared by all the members of the colony, but not by anybody else. And just to give you a sense, I mean, I won't talk about these experiments, but we seem to be finding more evidence of the first hypothesis, in consistent with the first hypothesis. The other question is, how do termites know where to build? How do they recruit the nestmates to the building site? Again, what is the nature of this communication, and how is the traffic organized to this site? And so one experiment that I can very quickly talk about is that what we did was we actually made a hole in the mound. And so we make this 2 centimeter diameter hole, and we watch how this hole is repaired. Okay, and so if I play this video, you'll see this is the ratio of the repaired part versus the actual hole. So when it's zero, no repair has happened. But as this repairing happens, the ratio goes closer to 100%. Okay, and so this is what we see. And this is a nice sigmoidal curve that we can, we do this in a number of different conditions. And as you can see, it's always the shape of the curve suggests that there is an exponential recruitment, and there's also an exponential de-recruitment, meaning that, it it appears for all intents and purposes as if these termites are uh, growing exponentially in numbers. So that recruitment process is um, directly proportional to the number of termites on the site. And as they start to complete the work, the process also is exponential. The de-recruitment is also exponential. That's when you get a sigmoid curve. So Sri Krishna did something interesting, which was actually manage. Now, what happens is it's very hard to see inside a termite mound, because if you put a camera there, they quickly come and cover it up with mud. Okay, they practice an extreme form of censorship, uh, but you can, uh, for short periods of time, get glimpses. And so Sri Krishna tried this out, and what you can see is that uh, the termite, so there's a hole that has been made in the left video here, and you can see that the termite numbers are growing. Okay, and you can see how there's increased traffic to this. And so he also filmed this traffic, and you can see that it's pretty orderly, not like Bangalore traffic, but it's actually pretty orderly. So they are all going to the site of repair. And so what Sri Krishna wanted to do was reconstruct this in an assay in the lab. And this was from an observation by Amritansh earlier, and which Sri Krishna, really has been, that's what his thesis is about. What he showed is that if you take termites and you put them in a petri dish, okay, so I'll just show you what happens. So if you put a whole bunch of termites in a petri dish, then what happens is they um, eventually will just go round and round. Okay, their traffic is organized, and it just goes round and round. Okay, as you can see, uh, and then it establishes this behavior which we call milling behavior. So we are looking at this as a proxy for how traffic inside the nest may be organized. Okay, um, and so here's that behavior. And then what we can do is film this and then track individual termites. Okay, so that's shown here. So we know exactly how they are getting recruited, getting sort of becoming part of this traffic. And then you can even sort of keep track of multiple individuals, as Sri Krishna has done here. You can see that in this case, you have a large number of termites that are individually, we are looking at their motion. Okay, so this is just by way of quantification of their behavior. Um, but it also allows you to look at their interactions. Okay, so if they're bumping into each other or what is going on. And so based on all of this, what we can do is this is a common parameter in soft matter physics. They call it the orientation order parameter. What they do is you can ask if the termites are, you can have a measure of the order. And I won't go into the details of how this, the equation is right there. But what you do is you measure if all of them are going in the same direction, then you get a value of 1. But if it is completely disorderly, then you get a value of 0. and if you, add something in between. So you can actually measure how it goes from 0 to 1 in these conditions. Okay. So for the milling assay, the first hypothesis is that the milling behavior is not density dependent. Okay, but a summative outcome of many individual level response. If that's true, then a single termite should also show you the same behavior as many termites. Okay. On the other hand, if the milling behavior is density dependent, then it should occur as a result of collective activity. And so we show that, in fact, it is density dependent. So here's a simple video that should give you a so right now nothing is happening. The termites are just sort of, and now you add termites to this. So the density has increased, and the moment the density increases, uh, the termites begin to mill around. So this is a density dependent behavior. And uh, Sri Krishna has measured this, so you can see that as the density increases, uh, you see that the milling onset time for milling becomes shorter. Okay. Uh, on the other hand, if you take a single termite, and if it does what a cockroach does, remember the termites are closely related to a cockroach, then that termite, as you can see here, doesn't really mill around. It tends to go back and forth. I may mill for a little while, but you know, eventually lose. Yeah. So, uh, so we think that this is the outcome of many which this is the outcome of collective behavior, and this allows transportation to be efficient. So it increases the, the the speed of their transport, and the question is, do they use mechanosensory cues for this, or are there chemical cues? And here's an experiment that will give you an answer to that question. So if it's mechanosensory, then they need that sleeve around, uh, and we take the sleeve and all of this disperses. But if you allow them to establish uh, this, once the termites have started to mill around, and now if you remove the sleeve, look at what happens. Okay, they continue to maintain this. And what this suggests is that there must be some cue that they've deposited which is being followed, because the mechanical constraint isn't there now. And if that is the case, then you should be able to remove these termites and put in naive termites, and they should also start milling. And so that's, so first of all, let's see if there is um, the other thing you would expect is that if you were to set this up and remove the part of this, so now there is no odor trail in that part, and you'll see that the termites are not able to anymore, right? So you've disrupted. Now in this case, I'll show you the experiment in which you have this. Now we get rid of these termites, then we add another set to these. Okay. And as you can see, they immediately follow those cues, and you can see some sort of a circle forming right where the previous circle was, right? So clearly there are chemical trails that are being laid out. Shouldn't surprise us. Many social insects lay chemical trails, but we are now able to ask interesting questions, right? So here's
So,
termites,
we couple of questions.
yeah.
Yeah, let's finish this
Yeah,
slide.
yeah. So, so this is just by way of showing that there are chemical trails. And if you sort of, uh, so this is where the trail is. Now we've marked it. And I can tell you that when you drop new termites in, they will exactly, uh, remember, they don't have eyes, so they can't see uh, the red line. Right? So you can see that the distribution, you can do different kinds of experiments, like you can wait for longer times and show that this trail goes away and things like that. It evaporates, stuff like that. Anyway, so to conclude, termites use a combination of mechanosensory feedback. This is first to establish the trail in the initial part where they need that sleeve. But once they have established the trail, it's chemicals that are used. The milling behavior is density dependent. The more the termites, the faster this happens. It reduces the time of transport, and as it turns out, the chemical cues are not species specific. So this goes into this business of hierarchical cues. So you can actually get termites of different species to organize a milling behavior around. Uh, so just to end this talk, I'm going to play this video because a lot of times people ask, okay, this is all very great, but what's the use of all of this? And I personally don't think that there needs to be any use of any of this. I really feel that we need to be looking at nature with open eyes and for its own sake. But at the same time, humans have the capacity to learn from nature and to build interesting devices. So there's a group in Harvard that we briefly collaborated with that has been looking at these kind of. None of our work has gone into this, but they were part of a HFSP grant that we were also part of, and so this video is from their group. This is sorry.
Termites are what motivated this whole project. We learned about these termites, these centimeter-long insects that together build mounds that can be 40
South
feet or more
African
tall.
termites.
And we said that's amazing. That shows that these large numbers of independent agents, all with limited sensing and no central control, that they can together build very large-scale, complicated structures. That's fantastic. Now, how would we do that? How would we build and program robots so that they build according to these same kinds of decentralized principles, but together produce particular things that we ask them for? This video is sped up 5 times because the robots actually move very slowly. They're capable of moving faster, but we have them moving very deliberately. They're being very careful to get everything right. Sort of measure twice, cut once. So here we've sped up 15 times. The robots are actually moving at about 2.5 feet a minute. So the main window is showing sort of a 3/4 view of the 3 robots building the structure. In the lower left is an inset showing a top view of the same thing. So if you're a human asking these robots to build you something, you start by giving them something like a picture of what you want. You give them basically a blueprint. And a computer takes that and annotates that with the equivalent of traffic rules. That gives the robots guidelines on how they're allowed to move through the workspace. Each one has its own brain, doesn't know what the other ones are doing. They're not getting directions from any central command. And they also each have all their own sensing. They can only tell what's going on right around themselves. They're working together in the sense that they're all working to build the same structure, but they're working independently. Each one is acting on its own. If you got rid of one of these robots, it wouldn't affect what the other 2 were doing. If you got rid of 2 of the robots, the 3rd one would be able to keep going and finish the job by itself. The long-term vision of a system like this is to do automated construction in settings where humans can't easily do it. So for instance, if we want to send astronauts to Mars, it's very hard, very dangerous and expensive to send astronauts to build there. It would be ideal if we could send a team of robots on ahead to build them a habitat, so that would be waiting for them when they show up. Of course, that's, again, a very long-term vision. Something that might be shorter term, still on the order of years, but maybe not decades, is to have a system like this build levees out of sandbags to protect against flooding. Classically, the times when you want to use robots instead of people are situations described by the 3 Ds: dirty, dangerous, and dull. And something like building with sandbags in a flood zone is all of those things. Right now we send in the National Guard. So if we could have robots do that for us. That could help us keep people out of harm's way. Again, not these specific robots, not these exact algorithms, but you can imagine how systems like these could be adapted to build walls out of sandbags to protect against flooding.
So, these are the sorts of outcomes, so one of the algorithms that Justin Werfel described in this was one of the algorithms that I just described in my talk, which is, where they do not communicate with each other, but each one does their own thing, and collectively they build these structures. Yeah. So, okay, I'll stop there and thank the various agencies that have funded us over the years, people who have advised us, either um, through committee meetings, or just helped us out. And This is the lab, and the two people whose work I talked about today are right there. That's Sri Krishna and Shubha. Uh, but it's a lab very much like a termite colony. We work together, and um, we're pretty cooperative. Uh, Synergistic is the word. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, Sanjay. We have a couple of questions in live chat box. Muhammad Amir asked about alates that you talked about. So he says that doesn't alates die in a day? And do they come back to the nest carrying fungus? And usually we see alates dead under the lights during nighttime.
A
So,
large number of alates die, but not all alates die. If alates died, then we would have no new colonies. Uh, so alates, a large number of them tend to die. They get eaten up. They bump into things. They just end up in a bad environment or whatever. But you know, in these systems, even if a few survive, they tend to generate new colonies. And maybe we are lucky that only a few survive. Otherwise, there would be mounds everywhere, literally everywhere. So more termite human conflict. Uh,
So I have one question, like you said in the initial period of this talk, this session, that this time scale is like kind of like somebody asked that how long does it take, how much time does it take to build a mound? So what proportion of lifespan of a termite is like invested in this making building structure?
oh, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question. I suspect that a very substantial part of their life is spent in building, mending, tending to structures. Uh, but I really can't answer that question, not just out of lack of knowledge. I think those kind of experiments need to be done, uh, which should be by putting cameras down the uh, termite mounds, and somehow getting around the censorship
Mhm.
issue that they have. Yeah.
Also, we have another question by Anil Kulkarni on milling behavior. So the question is milling behavior a common to all caste in a termite, or is it different for different?
We don't know. We would like to know the answer to that question. I suspect that it's common, uh, but we have only worked on one kind of termite so far. But in due course, that those are the kinds of questions one would like to ask. Uh,
Also we talked about different models of like building the structure. So there will be definitely a possibility then in which number of models being followed in building a structure, right?
uh, I mean, are you asking me if these are exclusive models, or?
Right.
Um, hmm. uh, I mean, the way we've thought of them was that they are exclusive at any given time. It may be that uh, the model evolves through the lifetime of a particular structure, maybe for part of the structure they use a certain kind, for other part they use some other kind. But at any given time, I think these would be kind of exclusive uh, in the way that we've constructed them.
And so in our previous sessions, like we talked about that bacteria. I mean, like our major sessions were focused on bacteria and other organism interacting with each other, right?
Hmm.
So do different species of insects come together and make a structure? Do we have an example of those? Like different insects making one structure.
Oh, uh, I am sure such examples exist. Nothing comes to mind right now, but I'm sure that there are examples of those kinds of structures. So cooperativity between species. Um, I don't know off the top of my head, but that would be interesting, wouldn't it? I imagine that there might be some examples of insects that build structures on top of other insect structures. Yeah. Uh, so I wouldn't rule that out. Yeah.
Okay, so as we were talking to each other, Suleiman asked in the live chat session, like insects, higher organism in Ave class, birds, how they develop their skills in netting nest in different ways. So,
How do they develop their skills? Again, the dominant hypothesis is that these are innate behaviors, meaning that birds just know that this is what they're supposed to do. It's encoded genetically. Uh, that's the dominant hypothesis. But that doesn't mean that they can't learn from each other. I mean, there are, birds are smart. Crows, for instance, learn to use tools, and if they see other crows using them, then they will learn to use those tools faster. So I'm sure that there must be some social learning that goes on in birds, and I'm sure that is also important.
so I'll just restrict myself to one last question that I have. When you talked about repairing of the mounds, right?
Hmm.
Are there specific class or caste of termites which have that job of guarding the structure, for example? Like so, like if some
Yes.
break happens,
Yes,
but
there are in fact specific castes that guard the structure. They're called soldier termites, and they have mandibles that are very sharp. And what they can do is they can use the mandibles to attack invaders, like ants, for instance. And some of them, they work in really interesting ways. Yeah. But yeah, there are specific termites that do that.
amazing. Now I think yeah, we have oh great. So it's 7:40 now, and we have had like around 20 people still watching with us.
Okay.
And thank you Sanjay for joining us, and like literally like I got quite enthusiastic.
Yeah, it was very fascinating to learn about their milling behavior was especially very fascinating to me.
Science is fun.
Yeah.
Right. So for our viewers watching, as you have noticed that these things that like science you can explore in nature around us. It can be a background, in fact, in your homes when you see in ants walking on the lines in raining season, and so I really got fascinated, Sanjay, about like how you showed this, how to like ask a simple question and make a hypothesis like a null hypothesis and how to test it. So that really quite fascinates and simplifies science in young generation especially. So great, thank you Sanjay for coming, and
Thank you very much for inviting me. This was fun.
with this, we end the session and stay safe, get vaccinated if possible, and follow COVID appropriate behavior. And to join our outreach initiative, please don't hesitate in sharing these videos to anyone who needs it. Thank you. and
Thank
see
you.
you next time.
Thank you.